Hey everyone, this is Josh from Josh Kid Films. Hope you're having a great night. I've gotten a ton of messages and comments and stuff lately asking for me to do a tutorial on how I color grade and the processes that I'm using, so that's what this is. I've put together some clips on the timeline here in Davinci Resolve, and I'm just going to go through them and kind of show you guys how I grade this. This is going to be like a two-part video because the first part I'm going to talk specifically about Canon FD lenses and the stuff that I'm shooting on Canon FD, because my grading process for that is different than when I use modern lenses for weddings or anything like that. I have a different process for weddings, and so on the second part of this video I'm gonna show you how I go through some of my wedding clips, and it'll be a little bit different than this. But let's go ahead and jump into this. I'm in Davinci Resolve right now. I started here with the media pool. I went to my desktop, in case you're not familiar with Davinci Resolve. Pulled in all my B-RAW clips into here. And just a little side note, I shoot everything in Blackmagic RAW. It's just a really great codec to work with. It's super flexible. I really love it. But anyway, let's go here. This is the cut page. We're in the edit page. You can see here that I've got all my clips laid out here. I'm just picked a few from my trip to New Orleans, so I can show you guys some of the stuff that I do. And so we'll start here. I've got output blanking on to 0.35, and that's just going to add the black bars. If I take it away, you'll see up there they go away. But I like that look for most of the stuff that I do. You could also set the resolution to just be the size of the screen. But for what I do, this works fine. One thing, when you bring in files into Davinci Resolve, it defaults to 1080p. There might be a way to change that, but it's important to go up here to project settings and then go down to timeline resolution and make sure you select 4K DCI if that's what you're shooting in. Most of this is either 4K 24p, or there was some 4K 60 and some 4K 48. I use the mode in camera with the Blackmagic Pocket 4K that conforms them to 24p right in the camera, so I don't have multiple frame rates or timelines or anything weird like that. But anyway, let's start with this first one. I'm going to stick on this frame. I'm going to leave the edit page because I just was kind of showing you guys how it was laid out, and we'll go ahead and go into the color page down here, and you'll see them right here. What I kind of try to do, especially if it's a video with a bunch of clips kind of from the same event, is I like to define a look and then kind of apply that same look to all the clips so it feels relatively consistent. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to have a total of 3 nodes. I'm just hitting Option S to add a node. Typically on this first node, what I do is I kind of leave that up for adjustments. And then on this one is where I'm going to put Film Convert. And for Canon FD, I really like to use Film Convert. It just has a nice look that I think works really well with these Canon FD lenses. I threw it on there. The default obviously doesn't look very good. We're going to come down here. We're going to select Blackmagic. We're going to select the Pocket 4K. Going to leave it on film because that's what it's in. Hit apply, and you can already see that looks a lot better. I don't like this stock as much. I tend to use this Fuji 8543 a lot. It's got a nice look to it, and I also really like the Super X. That's a little bit more of a stylized type look. But let's go up to the Fuji for this, and we'll go down here to film color. I usually drop that down a little bit, and then the curve down a little bit, and then the grain I usually stick around 40-ish for the Canon FD. I feel like I can get away with a little more grain. It looks a little more natural. Let me take it down just a little bit, maybe to 30. He looks a little bit warm to me. The nice thing about leaving your first node for adjustments is I like to do the adjustments before I hit it with the effect nodes. I feel like it reacts differently than if I tried to come after the effect and then change it back. But let's go ahead, and on this third node, most of the time I'm using some type of color shift node, like orange and teal or something cinematic. I have a bunch of different ones that I like, but one of the ones that I really like is this Drive LUT. It's from the Triune Cinematic LUTs collection. It has a really nice look to it. It's a little intense when you go all the way at one here, but I'm just coming down here to this node key panel, and I'm just going to take this down to like 0.5. And you can see that's already a pretty good look. You'll notice right now that the proxy mode's on quarter resolution, so that's mainly just for playback when I'm showing you guys. If I turn that off, you'll see that it's a lot sharper and more detailed. But just for the sake of this, we're going to turn it to quarter so that I don't have any lag. Anyway, now we can kind of start making our adjustments, and I'll do this with the scopes on so we can kind of see what we're doing. I don't know if you've used the scopes a lot, but it's a great way to kind of know where everything falls. It's a little bit different when you're using it with effects applied after your adjustment. If you kind of reset everything to perfect, it's going to lose a little bit of the effect that you created, but at the same time, it also helps it not look so extreme if you kind of find a healthy balance between the two. But let's go ahead and bring this down a little bit, just add a little contrast, and we'll bring this up a little bit. I don't tend to push the highlights a ton, especially on these Canon FDs. I just like the look of a little bit less highlight in the shot. It just tends to look a little bit more natural to me. And he still looks a little warm, so what I typically do at this point is I'll come in here into the color temperature of the B-raw panel, and I'll start playing around with that, kind of drop that down till I find a good look. I think I went a little too much. Let's try 4650. That looks pretty good to me. It kind of has a nice look to it. And depending on how you want this to feel, you can kind of stylize it. If you go here to gain, you can bring the highlights way down, kind of make it more like a flatter type look, or you can add more contrast and, more highlights and get kind of a more vivid look out of it. It's really up to you at that point, kind of how you want to do it, but I think for the sake of this, we'll just kind of leave it where we had it. And I feel good about the way that looks. It's got a nice kind of organic look to it. I think I might even, now that I watch it play back, I think that I might just bring the highlights down even more, just because it kind of stick out a little bit to me. And I'm good with that. Let's go to the next clip. So what I do here, I was saying I want to kind of try to keep the same look, and so I'll just hit this. It's the += sign on my keyboard to just copy the grade from the previous clip. We can already tell on this one that it's too cold, but the first thing I typically do is I'll go here and just reset this node grade. So any adjustments that I had made on the previous clip specific to that clip, we're going to just get rid of and kind of start from scratch on that node. I think the exposure is fine on this. Let's go ahead and just warm it up a little bit. Try like 52, that might be a little much. 51 looks good to me, and that's already kind of like a nice low contrast kind of look. I like that, but for the sake of this, we're going to add a little bit of contrast to it, and then we'll bring up the gamma a little bit. And I'm just hitting Command F to go to full screen so that we can see these. And I'm going to click here on the gain. I'm going to bring the highlights down a little bit. And sometimes what I'll do is if I feel like I've already made like the major adjustments on the B-raw panel to the color temperature here, instead of going back to the B-raw panel every time, if I just want to make micro adjustments, I'll go down here to this second panel and I'll just grab the temperature and I'll just shift it just a little bit. And it looks a little green to me, so I'm going to shift this tint up just a little bit. And I really like the look of that. I think that's a nice look. So let's go to this one. Occasionally, I shoot some of this stuff handheld when I'm traveling with my family. So you'll see it's kind of got a little bit of a, actually, that's not too bad. I was thinking it was going to be shaky, but it's really not. And so let me just see. If it is, the easiest way to just deal with that in Resolve, if you're not super familiar with Resolve, is you just go down here to this window panel. It's a little tracker panel. You can click on window and go to stabilizer. I think I've already maybe applied some stabilization here, and that's why it's so smooth, but you just hit stabilize. We're gonna go to a different one here, different style of stabilization, just so that it'll kind of reset what it's already done. I'm gonna put it back on the default, which is perspective, and I'm gonna hit stabilize again, just to be sure that we didn't have any artifacts or remains from when I was messing around with these clips earlier. This should be the best case scenario. And so let's start with this one. We're going to do the same thing. The problem with the stabilization is if you just go and you hit apply, or you copy the grade from the previous clip like we did on the last one, what it's going to do is it's going to copy the stabilization too, and it might mess up your stabilization. You see how it got kind of shaky? The best way to do it is if you've already stabilized your clip, I would just add the nodes, and then you click on this other one and you can just copy these effect nodes right over. That's an easy and quick way to do it. Or you can just apply the copying of the grade before you stabilize. Either one works fine. This clip right here, it looks a little blue to me. So let's go back to the B-Raw panel, and we're gonna go up a little bit here at 54, see how that feels. What I'm really wanting to do for this one is adjust more for this guy right here, since he's kind of the focal point of the clip. And so I'm looking there more at than the walls or anything like that. That looks pretty good. He might be a little bit dark. So we'll go and just add a little bit of contrast, or I'm sorry, a little bit of lift there. And I'm gonna bring the highlights down a little bit just because this is a little bright. And then kind of raise that up a little bit more. So I feel good about the way he looks right there. I want this guy to be the focal point of this clip, and one of the reasons I really love to work in Resolve is how easy it is to mask things and adjust things in your clip, especially with Blackmagic Raw. It's really just limitless what you can do. But what I do when I want to add a mask, because I want to add a mask to this wall and these walls around him to kind of darken it and make him more the focus, I'll add it before the effect nodes. So I'm going to click on this, I'm going to hit Option S, and then I'm going to go over here to my mask. I'm going to click on the pen tool, and I'm hitting Command minus to zoom out there. And then I'm going to go ahead and just kind of mask this off around him, kind of like this. And what you do here, because obviously as the clip changes, your mask is going to move. You click on this this tracker panel that we used earlier to stabilize, and we're going to go back to window, and we're going to just hit play forward, and it's going to track the mask as it goes forward. So you're done, the clip's there, and the mask is adjusted as the clip moved. So now we can start to go in here and we'll start adjusting and bringing it down. You kind of have some options here stylistically with what you want to do. You know, the wall kind of right now has this blue thing going on, which is really nice. But you could say I want it to all kind of be the same color as he is, and kind of shift it more into the warmer hues there. I kind of like the fact that it's blue. Right now we don't have any softening on this mask. I did that so you guys could kind of see what it's doing. We'll come in here now back to this window right here where we selected the mask, and we're just going to move this up to like 20 just so that it'll soften the edge. And then I really like that, so you can kind of see what it's doing. Let's go to full screen, and then it's just kind of moving your focus a little bit to him. I think that adds something to the shot. And so now when we play it back, it looks good. So let's go to this shot. We're not gonna just copy over the grade since we had a mask and we were doing something special on that one. We'll just do what we did where we added the nodes with Option S, and then I'm gonna come in here, I'm gonna grab the film convert, and then I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna grab this color Shift Lut, and we're gonna apply it like that. That's pretty good so far. Let's do this. Let's go back here, and I think it might be a hair too warm. We'll drop this down to 53, kind of see how that looks. It also feels slightly green to me, so I'm going to bring this up just a little bit. I like that. Let's go ahead and add some contrast. And I'm going to leave the highlights and the gain where it is. Just going to bring this up a little bit. I might even bring the gain down a little bit. And maybe just a little bit cooler. Sometimes it's easy to just go too far and then kind of dial it back to see kind of where you want to be. I'm good with that clip. I think it looks good. Let's move on. We'll go to this one. And I didn't use this one in my video, but I grabbed it because I thought this would be a good example of how easy it is to work with color in Resolve. Let's just add these and we'll copy them like this. Sometimes when you have a lot of green in the shot, it can just get a little bit, just a lot to look at visually. And so it kind of distracts from the subject. I think it's a little bit colors off here anyway. So let's go ahead and cool it down just a little bit in this B-Raw panel. That looks better, and I'm going to add a little bit here. I've found that the Canon FD lenses tend to shift a little bit more towards the green than the magenta, which is probably why I like them. But sometimes when you're dealing with a lot of green in your frame, you end up pushing the tint a little bit further than on other shots where there's not a ton of green. That's been my experience at least. But let's go ahead and add some contrast here. And then let's see. I'm kind of okay with it being a little bit darker. I like the way that shot looks. Or what I was going to say, if I do any type of color shifting in the same way as the other things I was doing, I'm going to do that before the effect nodes. So I'm going to add a node right here with Option S. And I'm going to go right here to this panel, the curves panel. And there's a lot of options here that you can do if you want to kind of tweak these greens. Now, I watched a few tutorials where they had kind of pulled a lot of the green out to kind of create a Stranger Things look in a tutorial, and that was really interesting. But it's really just amazing what Resolve has as far as tools go. You can pretty much do anything you want. But let's just, for example, this is Hue versus Hue panel right here. This is going to tweak the colors that are already there. So like if I click that with the eyedropper, you see it kind of gave me a range here, and you'll see instantly as I move this up, you know, or down, kind of how the colors are shifting. That looks ridiculous. Obviously it's too intense, but sometimes if you wanted to go for more of like a Sahara feel or something with a little bit more oranges, like that's a pretty easy way to shift the greens. But I don't think in this clip I really have much of an issue with the greens as far as their color. I just think we can dial them back a little bit, and that's when I would probably use this other panel down here, the hue versus saturation. So you can kind of click right here, same thing we did with the eyedropper, and you'll see here as I pull this out, it pretty much sucks a lot of that out. I don't want to go that extreme. I just want to just a little bit, just kind of dial it back a little bit, maybe a little more. You can kind of see it just kind of subdues it just a little bit, and it's going to contain however much you want. So this one you can kind of add as far as how wide you want this cut to be. You can see just that one right there. It's almost like there's a few different shades of green in this grass, you know. So if you want to get all of it, sometimes you're going to have to make your dip a little bit wider. But now you can see that's the original, and then that's with the color shift on, and I feel like that just helps bring the focus to the animal just a little bit more than it was. Let's move on to this next clip. I shot this clip on a hotel in New Orleans at the top, and when we shot it, it was pretty dark. There wasn't a ton of light. Really, the only light that we were getting was from the building. So this is a good high ISO example. We'll do what we did on the last one with copying the film convert over, which is going to probably make this look a little dark, just because these LUTs are a little bit more intense. as far as contrast goes than what the Blackmagic film is shot in, which is what you would want. But let's look here right now and see kind of what we're at. I've got this ISO 4000. You can see there's a decent amount of grain and stuff. I don't think I'm going to raise the ISO here. I think I'm just going to bring the exposure up a little bit just to kind of get it where I want it. I don't necessarily need it to be super bright because it was a dark scene, but maybe a little bit more. And let's drop this down just a little bit here. And sometimes you'll find like skin tones and things like that, they're going to change based off like your exposure and how you fix your exposure. So sometimes, sometimes as you brighten things up, you're going to find that your colors need to shift a little bit more than when you first started, which is okay. I'm really liking that so far, but I think this is what I'm talking about. I kind of want to cool it down a little bit more, just based off the fact that you're seeing kind of her warm body a little bit more now that everything's brighter. Let's brighten that up a little bit more. So one thing we can do here, just to get rid of some of this noise, is we're going to add a node. And this is the time, if I'm doing noise reduction, typically I'm going to add it as a last step. And that's a little different than what I was doing with some of these other adjustments. But if you add it, same thing with Option S. And then we'll come down here to the noise, it's the motion effects panel, but temporal noise reduction here, I'd start with 3. And I'm going to go to like something 15 just because I know we have a decent amount of noise. That looks pretty smooth. Let's look at it with the proxy mode off and to see if we're not blurring our edges a little too much here. I still feel like there's a decent amount of detail there and it looks smooth up here. So I'm good with that. One thing you can do also in this frame, and I'm just going to turn off this noise reduction so it doesn't slow us down too much, but I'm going to add an additional node here using Option S. And I think it might be kind of nice to just affect the scene around her differently a little bit. So we're going to come back here to where we did the pen tool from the other example, and we're going to kind of do a very similar thing here. We're going to go around, and we're just going to kind of go around her. And then we'll do the same thing we did with the tracker. I'm going to play it back. It's going to do its thing. It's going to track with it. Most of the time it works pretty flawlessly. And then a good thing to know is if it doesn't work perfectly, because it defaults to this clip right here, you can click frame, and then any adjustment you make is going to hold that adjustment, but it's not going to get rid of the original tracking that you did. So if there's something like this where you just kind of want like a minor adjustment on top of what you already did, that's a great way to do it. So now you can see as we play it back where that was getting cut off on the side there. Now it stays all the way out. So anyway, let's go back here and we're going to darken this up just a little bit. I don't really want to take the gain down because I still like the highlights coming from there. I just want to make it a little bit more contrasted to her. And then you see here where we don't have this softened. We're going to soften that again. 15 to 20 is usually a good value there. And now you can see the difference there. That's before. And that's after. I feel like that really helps her to stand out as the subject of the shot. I really like that. And then sometimes when I make an adjustment like that, I can come back here to the main adjustment node, and then I'll add a little bit more of an adjustment on top of the mask that I did. Like say I wanted to just make it a little bit brighter, which is what I just did there. Okay, so now let's add back our noise reduction. And that clip's looking really nice. I really like that. Okay, so let's move on to this next clip. This is an interesting one. This was a fish tank in an aquarium and this alligator gar. Sometimes you get in these situations where you don't really know what the natural the natural color of something is, and so you have a little bit more creative freedom to kind of adjust it. It's not like a person with skin tones, it's a fish, and they're all kind of different, so that's kind of fun. But we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to copy these effects over from the previous grade. It's slowing down on me a little bit because of the noise reduction, but that's kind of what it looks like with our basic effects grade on it, which isn't bad. I kind of like it in a lot of ways because it's just kind of a low contrast with a nice color, but we're going to adjust it a little bit anyway. We're going to give it a little bit of contrast and a little bit of highlights. And as you can tell, this is very green, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But as you start to adjust things like tint and temperature, you're going to see, obviously drastic changes with this. And this is one of those times where, so there's not necessarily like a right or wrong. I probably am not going to do this in the B raw panel. I'm going to just do it here on the temperature, because it's not like I'm trying to get to like a specific value or anything like that. But anyway, I think that's nice where we're not completely blue. We have a little bit of the blue taken out, and that seems like a pretty natural looking color spectrum for that fish to me. So I'm pretty good with that one. And let's go to this last clip. And we'll add our same effects here. And this one too. And I like that already. That looks really nice. Let's maybe add some color or some contrast, I'm sorry. And maybe just a little bit of the gain here. And then bring down the gamma just to help the sky stand out. I think that's a nice look. As you adjust temperature here, you'll see, it kind of changes the vibe. You're going to get different colors out of the sky, and I think at that point it just kind of becomes subjective based on your scene and what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, the all blue is really nice too. There's really no right or wrong there. One thing you can do here, which if you just want to have fun with the clip and kind of just adjust and tweak, you can add that extra note here like we've done on some of the other clips with Option S. And then we'll go back to this curves, and I think we'll go to the hue versus hue, and let's click on it. And then you can get a little bit of a different kind of look there. If you want it to have like more green in the sunset, or maybe we'll go the other direction and kind of give it a little more purple. That doesn't really look super natural, but if you wanted something heavily stylized, that's an easy way to do it. I'm good with the way that looks though. Let's turn it back on. Another thing you can do here in the curves panel, we talked about the hue versus saturation. Sometimes when you're working with like heavy colors like this, just adding a little saturation is nice. But also the hue versus luminance is going to control basically how bright or dark that color is in your scene. And you can kind of see as I'm like adjusting it, it's brightening it up when I go back, and when you bring it down, obviously it gets darker. When you have something like this, it's really just a nice way to play around with it and get some different effects that might be a little different than what you shot. Resolve's really good about doing that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's kind of just like a basic walkthrough with how I've been grading these FD lenses. I just want to say too, there's a lot of ways to color grade. There's a lot of different ways that I color grade. I don't know everything, and I'm still learning myself, but for the Canon FD lenses that I use, I've found this process to be really helpful and useful, and it's gotten really good feedback from everybody, so hopefully it'll be helpful to you as well. Like I said, I have a little bit different process for grading modern lenses, but I think the same principles will apply to both. If you're shooting modern lenses, I would definitely try this process and see if it works for you. If you found this useful, make sure to subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and stay tuned for part 2 when we talk about how I grade for weddings.